On the third day, he rose again. Very easy to see this statement as a rather matter-of-fact thing. We celebrate on the Friday. We don't celebrate, but we remember how Jesus was put to death. But then we think it's okay, because in a few days he comes back to life again. To do that is to miss the enormity of what actually happened on that first day of the week. Jesus had gone through death. He didn't just come back to life, he went through death and into a new life. This is absolutely central to the Christian faith. Now, there are those who would like us to believe that Jesus' disciples eventually realised that they could feel the presence of Jesus with them, and so they made up this story about him coming back to life so that others could then see, well, we can probably experience his presence too. If that were the case, then they were pretty poor storytellers, because in all the gospel accounts, the first witnesses to the resurrection were women who saw an angel who told them he had risen. Now, back in those days, women were not even allowed to give witness in court because they were just regarded as so unreliable. So if you're going to make up a story, at least make the witnesses people that others would say, oh yes, well, they're a worthy person, we'll listen to what they say. Then there are skeptics today who say, but it can't have happened because it's impossible. In a way, that's the whole point. Jesus was dead, no heartbeat, no brain waves, no breath. He was dead. His body was dead. He could do nothing. He couldn't bring himself back to life. But here we have God who called the universe into being. It was by his command that the universe was brought into being. And then you have Jesus, who called Lazarus out of the tomb. He didn't sort of beg Lazarus to come. He just said, Lazarus, come forth. Lazarus came out of the tomb. He was still dressed in the clothes, grave clothes, and they had to untie him and set him free. Then Lazarus was just resuscitated, like he would eventually die again. But it was simply by the power of God's command that he came out of the tomb. And so here, with Jesus in the tomb, dead, it's by God's command that he comes to new life. He was the same Jesus. He bore the scars of his crucifixion, but he was different. Like, he could appear in a locked room, he just came through the wall. He could disappear in front of people's eyes. He was different. He wasn't recognisable straight away. It really was just the personal touch that made people realise that it was Jesus. You have an example of this in Mary. She's outside the tomb, the empty tomb, weeping, crying, because she didn't know what they'd done with the body of her Lord. And she sees a man there and thinks it's the gardener and says, what have they done with his body? And Jesus just said, Mary. And instantly she recognised that personal touch. This was her Lord. The resurrection was essential. It had to happen, and the reason is this. Death is the consequence of sin and disobedience. Now, Jesus never disobeyed the Father. He lived the perfect life. When he died, he was doing it in our place. He'd taken upon himself all the sin of the world, and he died. He gave himself in sacrifice to pay for that. But once that sin was paid for, then death had no authority to hold Jesus. Jesus' sinless life was vindicated by God raising his human body and giving it a glorified body that would never ever see death. So why is this resurrection important to us? Well, if Jesus had not been raised and people had not been eyewitness to him, then we would have no way of knowing that his sacrifice had been sufficient to pay for our sin. His resurrection shows us that God accepts his sacrifice. And then the great news for us is, if we have accepted Jesus, that he gave his life for us, then the death of the body for us is not the end. We have a promise of being raised to a new and a glorious life with him. 1 Corinthians 15:20, Paul writes this, but Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. By this he means that Jesus is the first one of the crop of the dead to be resurrected. And so it's a prototype of what lies ahead for us who are believers. In fact, that although he was very different, he was still recognisable, tells us that when we're raised to new life, we will still be known for who we are, be known to one another. We'll retain our personal identity. Yes, we'll be different, but we will know one another. Jesus went through hell when he died on the cross. The Father turned his back on him, and Jesus felt the absolute horror of that. My God, why have you forsaken me? He went through hell, separation from God, so that we don't have to. But also, he has given us the gift of that new life, a glorious life, once our physical bodies have died. We make our choice now. We choose life by following Jesus, or we choose death and hell by living life our own way.
See what a morning, gloriously bright, with the dawning of hope in Jerusalem. Folded the grave, tomb filled with light, as the angels announced Christ is risen. See God's salvation plan, wrought with love, born in pain, paid his sacrifice. Fulfilled in Christ the man, for he lives, Christ is risen from the dead. See Mary weep, where is he laid? As in sorrow she turns from the empty tomb. Hears a voice speak, calling her name. It's the Master, the Lord, raised from life again. The voice that spans the years, speaking life, stirring hope, bringing peace to us, will sound till he appears, for he lives, Christ is risen from the dead. One with the Father, Ancient of Days, through the Spirit he clothes faith with certainty. Honor and bless, glory and praise to the King, crowned with power and authority. And we are raised with him. Death is dead, love is won, Christ is taught.